I moved back to Silicon Valley about 3 years ago after spending years abroad as an economist. At the time, I had been doing economic development research in North Africa and Cairo right after Arab Spring. So I was living in post revolutionary Cairo. And right when I moved back, I got a job in Mountain View with a small startup that needed me as business development manager to get into about 50 different high level relationships with investors and C-level executives in the gaming industry. But I knew no one, and I knew very little about games at the time. So I just did what I've always done whenever I've been to new places where I had no network. And I made a list of people that I thought would be influential, that had common criteria in terms of needs and pain points and different ways that I could benefit them. And I just created a few CSVs of about 150 names that I then began crafting cold email campaigns to. So I basically wrote 2 or 3 different sequences of emails for this audience. And within about a month of starting, I had gotten a 67% response rate from some of the most skeptical people in the industry that are regularly bombarded with generic cold emails. So I was successful because my approach was very different and very personalized. I had targeting based on what they had invested in the past, as well as some of their backgrounds and personal interests. And no one even knew it was a mail merge or a cold email. They just thought of it as a personal request. And the really good cold emails are like that. So not long after that happened, my boss started bragging about what I was working on, and next thing I know, a bunch of other companies are asking to take me to lunch and dinner, buy me coffee, because they're trying to poach me. And that is how I got my first 6 or 7 clients for cold email campaigns. Time went on and the company was relocating, and I decided it was the perfect time to start my own company, and I started SalesFocus. About 2 years later now, we've worked with over 100 companies, completely bootstrapped, just dog fooding our own cold email best practices. And I've, in the last 10 years, written more than 10,000 cold emails by writing at least one cold email every day. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is how to actually write a cold email from start to finish that will get a response rate that is 2 to 3 times higher than the industry standard, as we regularly do for our clients. And I'm also going to share a few secrets in terms of how to write a mass email that feels like it's one-on-one. So the first trick to cold email is really understanding who you are writing for. A CTO is totally different than a VP of marketing or a VP sales or a sales rep. So you need to think about what industry are they coming from, what size company are they in, what are their needs, what are their pain points. And a great way to start, whether you're emailing a single individual or 10 or 100 or 1,000 or 100,000 people, is to actually look at a few names from your list. So pick 3, 5, maybe 10 names from your list and go on LinkedIn and actually look at these people. Take note of the bullets in their skills, how they recommend people, how they're recommended by others, how they describe their job description, and anything along these lines that might be relevant. Go a step further. Go on Twitter, look at forums, see what kind of content they're consuming, writing, sharing, and you start to get a sense of who these people really are. And so once you have that, you can think about how you want to write your cold emails. So the first step in writing a cold email is thinking about the subject line. What can you do to entice these people to actually open your email versus just delete it or ignore it, or worse, have it marked as spam? So way too many emails these days are extremely generic, and they're using the same templates and subject lines from 5, 10, 15 years ago. Things like introduction, company name / first name, and so forth. And the problem is, this approach has been done to death. People want a magic bullet, but in reality, once you have that and it's just used so many times, people become immune to that trick and actually very weary of it. And so what I instead advocate is thinking of value that you can actually add to your subject line to entice your prospects to open and keep reading and actually form a relationship. So a really simple trick is to say that you have an idea for something, or advice for something else, or a tip, feedback, anything along these lines that just by opening the email, they're likely to get value out of it. And so here is an email that got, I believe, 12 people responded to it, and actually set up appointments. The open rate was probably around 53%, and it's idea for companies' sales objectives. So that is so much more specific and relevant and thoughtful, that it makes the prospect think that you've actually taken the time to write to them as a one-off request instead of just spamming them. So once you've got them to open it, what's next? Okay, so the first sentence of your email determines whether they're going to keep reading or just stop right there. And the problem is, a lot of people's emails are very, very self-focused. It's kind of natural in terms of how we were taught to write letters as children. You're used to saying who you are and why you're contacting them. Unfortunately, in most cases, this is actually a waste of space. They don't actually care who you are, who your company is. All they really want to know is what's relevant for them. What's the value that they're going to get out of reading and maybe responding, and how does it relate to them and their company and their life. So this example here, of wanting to introduce you to the company name of the startup, Acme, and what Acme does is we intend to revolutionize the software quality assurance model. So that doesn't say anything about the benefit to the prospect. What are they going to get out of it? Great, you're going to revolutionize this. Okay, I'm already skeptical whenever anyone says revolutionize or game change or anything like that, but this is very vague. It doesn't say anything specific. There's no benefit in there for the prospect whatsoever. On the other hand, you look at this first sentence that goes with the subject line I just showed you. It says, I was wondering what company X was doing to achieve their sales goals. This is a little bit vague. It could be a little more specific in terms of maybe different KPIs or give a little more context, but it explains why the person is reaching out to contact the prospect, as well as it opens a conversation. And this is really all a cold email is. It's just a conversation. You're not trying to sell them. You're not trying to get them to do a bunch of different things. All you're trying to do is get them to respond and start a conversation with you. Nothing more, nothing less. And so assuming that you've got them to keep reading and you've hooked them with something that's interesting and conversational, what's next? Okay, now is where you build your credibility. You're still a stranger, and the prospect is probably pretty suspicious of why you're reaching out to them. They're very quickly evaluating in a few seconds if you are worth their time or not. Are you someone credible, or are you full of BS? And so that's where the social proof statement comes in. So in this case, the person who sent this cold email said, "We have worked on a number of projects and campaigns. All our packages are tailor-made and designed according to your requirements. Increase your client base and market your product to millions, or let us bring the buying leads for you." First of all, this is awful grammar. It's not very well written, but it's so non-specific. It's offering and promising a lot without explaining how, and also just giving grand statements without any kind of proof or credibility. And so when you see something like this, any intelligent person would be skeptical of claims like this. It's not convincing. So what you should do instead is try to build trust and a sense of credibility through actually naming names of some clients and giving stats wherever you can. So here's a sentence that goes to the intro and subject line that was just mentioned. It says, "We have a theory about leveraging the competitive spirit of games to increase sales productivity. This same concept has helped our SaaS clients increase their revenue by 100% in 8 weeks and achieve a 65% increase in outbound emails over 3 months." And so it actually did say the client's name here, which was taken out of the example, but notice how it says SaaS clients. This email was all sent to VP sales operations titles at SaaS companies. So there's evidence of success with people like them. And what's the success? 100% increase in revenue in 8 weeks and a 65% increase in outbound emails over 3 months. So 2 positive things. It kind of explains how there's a little bit of mystery to keep you intrigued, but it's much more credible. So, okay, let's assume that you've gotten as far as convincing these people to somewhat trust you. They've read the email halfway through or 2/3. What's next? Your call to action. So you can get everything right and then screw up your call to action and your whole email was a waste. A lot of times, one of the biggest mistakes that people do is they forget that they need to have an incentive for the prospect to respond in their call to action. Other times they'll also have a very weak or confusing call to action, or just simply even leave the call to action off. But let's look at this example. So it says, "If there is any question you want to ask, feel free to message me at any time." This is something I might use for a breakup email. This is definitely not a call to action I would use for a cold email. It's not giving any reason to the prospect to respond at all. It's so passive, and it's just not very enticing. So let's look at this one on the other hand. "When do you have time for a short call so I can learn a bit more about companies, sales processes, and share my sales productivity idea with you?" So this is going back to the same example that I showed before. It's the same email. This is the call to action sentence there. And so notice how there's an incentive here. The incentive is hearing an idea, which we talked about before, is related to increasing one company's revenue by 100% in 8 weeks. So the idea is that the prospect thinks, okay, if I take this call, there's a very good chance that whether or not I do business with this person, I'm going to learn something of value that will improve my company's sales productivity or revenue. And as a VP of sales operations at a software company, that is very enticing to me. So that's probably why that this single email got about 12 appointments when it was first sent out, more since then. So Let's look again at the entire email that was actually written, just so you can see it in its entirety. So notice how short it is. A lot of emails are way too long. They resemble novels or blog posts. And I don't really want to say that there's a certain number of sentences or characters that you can't go beyond whatsoever, because it's important that you are clear in explaining what your intentions are and what the value is. But generally, as a rule of thumb, I would not go beyond 5 sentences. In fact, most of my cold emails are actually only 3 sentences long, although this one is 4. So the trick is to focus only on one idea or benefit per cold email. So the main idea or benefit here is sales productivity, increasing sales productivity. So if you notice, everything in this email is related to that or supporting that in one way or another. So the subject line is a little bit vague but intriguing, but it's related to sales productivity. The first sentence is kind of an intro to a conversation around that. And then in the middle, they explain a little bit more about their approach to sales productivity as well as their results they've had. And then finally, there's a call to action around that. Notice how you're not listing 5 bullets of different benefits or different product features. It's all one idea. And the best copywriting, whether it's cold emails or, web copy or whatever, is very focused. And when you lose focus, you dilute your message. So for every email you send, just focus on one idea at a time. If you feel like you have a lot of different ideas and value props, that's great. Instead, what you can do is make a list of all of them and separate them into different emails. So I actually recommend sending 8 different emails to every prospect, because actually about 30% of your responses in a campaign will come from emails 5 through 8. So if you're only sending 4 emails, you're missing out on about 30% of your leads. So each of those emails can be focused on a single takeaway point, just like this one. And if you do that, and try to cover as much ground as you can by listing all your different, not listing, but in each email going over a different value prop and a different angle around that value proposition, whether it's more fear of loss or more focused on competition or desire, that will attract different kinds of people from your audience. And so if you have 8 emails, email 3 might be very desire focused, and that will attract some people, whereas email 4 might be more fear of loss, and that attracts a different kind of person, and that's okay. Also notice that there's a lot of personalization in this example. Company name is mentioned 3 times, and that's important so that the prospects know that this is not a completely mass email, even though it actually is. And you can go a lot further with personalization, even having a custom sentence. But before you go wild with that, it's better to go lighter with personalization like this to see what your baseline is, so that you know basically the cost of increasing your personalization. So you want to think, for spending an extra 2 hours for a list of 100 people, how much higher response rate am I getting? Because that time could also be spent elsewhere. So if 2 hours, I'm making these numbers up, but if for 2 hours you're able to significantly increase your response rate, then you should definitely personalize more, especially if your audience is very competitive in terms of other industries are reaching out to them a lot. But if you have a really great product and not a lot of people are hitting your audience and they're very excited about your product, maybe you don't need to do that. So it just kind of depends, and that's why it's good to start with minimal personalization. The last point I want to note is that this email is also very conversational, and it's written in first and second person. So you want to avoid third person using words like they and our industry, blah, 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 blah. Keep it very conversational so it feels like a one-on-one request and not marketing. And I hope you found that helpful. So if you want more cold email tips, you can go to our latest guide. Actually, there's a special link just for you that I created. It's bit.ly/salesfolkjuly. And you can see copywriting secrets for crafting seductive cold emails. It's all about how to write cold emails that will basically start conversations every time, and all the copywriting best practices around that. Hopefully you found that helpful. Thank you. So now I'm going to hand it over to Chris. He's going to talk a little bit about the tools that you can use to bring your sales efforts to the next level.